Rick Ross and Meek Mill just dropped a project. The initial reaction from a lot of people is like 35,000, that's nothing.
The fact that they own 100% of it is just continuing to show the trend of major artists saying, hey, I want to own what I'm bringing into the world now, versus saying, I'd rather have a massive hit and only own a portion of that.
What's going down is the podcast. We're very close to coming up with a name. Someone suggested PDA, which I liked, but that was predicated on the misunderstanding that Aaron's name started with an A.
I like that.
But we're getting somewhere. And then there was another suggestion. What was it? The ad odds. People like that. That was Aaron's idea. So we're getting closer to it.
It wasn't my idea. It was taken from somebody else in the comments. Remember?
Okay.
Aaron's was until further notice, which sounds cool too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we'll figure it out. But no matter what this podcast is called, now it's brought to you by Two Loss, one of the most technologically advanced music distributors out there. I also work there, director of communications. Distribute your music to more stores than any other music distributor. What else we got? We got 100% royalties to you, copyright registration, instant advance opportunities, AI cover art generators. We got a lot of options, a lot of features on the platform. Check it out. Use the promo code PAIN, PAIN, until we get another name for the podcast. Just use PAIN's promo code. You get 3 months free, and we got some cool stuff starting soon. The contest actually is going to start this week. Once you guys listening to this podcast, it'll be starting this week. So,
can we leak any information about that?
Not yet, just in case there's some delays.
Damn. All right.
The contest is starting. It's an opportunity for you guys to win. I think the prize, the full prize pool is $33,000. So it'll be $20,000 to the first prize, $8,000 to second prize, $5,000 to the third prize. But great exposure for everybody that participates. So stack some fans, steal some fans. Should be a good time. So looking forward to launching that.
Dame is an MC, y'all. That was crazy.
It feels that. Let me try. All right. So twoloss.com, use the promo code PAIN for 3 months free of unlimited music distribution. And the thing is, I went to the site, obviously, and it's the least expensive distribution company that I've come upon. So when Dame's talking, because Dame's a little bougie, I'm thinking of all the features that are involved in Two Loss. I'm like, this is going to be one of these premium ass pricing tiers. And no, it's you get 3 months free if you use my name as a promo code PAIN. But after that period, it's only $2.99 a month. So I was like, cool, we're not trapping anyone in any bad situation. This is probably the right choice for most artists.
And then the instant advance part is crazy.
Yeah.
Like most distributors, you have to have a relationship with them, and then you get a rep, and then it's this long conversation after you've distributed for over a year with them about getting an advance and being able to just plug in your numbers and then be like, okay, you are worth this type of advance. I think that's a really, really, really dope opportunity.
Yeah. And it's for people that have some traction. So if you aren't even getting paid out by Spotify because you don't have 1,000 streams, you can't get an instant advance on nothing. So you got to have some numbers. But yeah, it's a dope plan. And it's even cheaper if you get the year. I think the whole year is like $20. So yeah, definitely check it out. At the very least, even if you don't use it, use the promo code just to check out the platform and to look at the features. Look at the different options so you can compare it to what you're using now. But yeah, so this podcast is supported by Two Loss. Just a disclaimer. But let's jump into some topics because we got some good ones.
If you've ever been to my channel, you'll see Rick Ross' name all the time because that's kind of, I've produced a couple of songs for Rick Ross. I feel like that style of production and musicality is my thing. So Rick Ross and Meek Mill just dropped a project. As a matter of fact, the lead single was produced by Fresh Air, among other producers who we've had on this podcast. Shout out to him. And there's something else going on with anytime I read first week sales predictions and the internet jumps on analyzing it, and people who love the artist are defending the predictions, people who are just dicks are mocking the numbers. even if the numbers are high, even if the numbers are low, even if the numbers are in the middle. And in this situation, I think relative to average album sales that we're seeing these days, this is pretty middle ground, right? What was it, 35,000?
Yeah. I mean, the numbers are tough because they didn't, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I didn't look at it, but I don't think, because a lot of times artists' numbers even look more impressive than they are because there's songs that have been out that have racked up streams that are on the album.
Me
that then count. Oh, yeah, I think Aaron's lagging again. That then count for those first week numbers, and I don't think they had any. Mm-hmm. They definitely didn't have a lot of songs out prior, so this was kind of like
they just had that one that the single that was the Fresh Air track.
So they only had one, and so there wasn't a ton of music that was out. So it's closer to like a true first week sales number.
Yeah, and I think the initial reaction from a lot of people is like 35,000. That's nothing, and obviously there are artists struggling to get 1,000 streams on Spotify, hence our conversation. So 35,000 sales equivalents, that's a good amount. Or at very least, maybe I shouldn't say good or bad, but without making that kind of judgment call, it's a difficult number to achieve. I'll say that.
I was going to go into Z's thread. Shout out to Z from AudioMac. The reason that the number is even more significant is because they're not on a major label with this one, which most people would think. So Z goes into saying, despite a seemingly modest sales figure, at least compared to their back catalog's performance, the number that really matters is 100. For Too Good to Be True, that's the name of the project, MMG signed a licensing deal with Gamma, which is Gamma's the new music distro company that has swallowed up several other distro companies, including Vidya, who I've worked with before, allowing them to make 100% ownership.
I didn't know Vidya sold.
Larry Jackson acquired them. So Gamma allowing them to pair and maintain 100% ownership of their master rights. Gamma will exploit the recording during the term of the agreement. When the terms and rights revert back to Meek and Ross. He said he hasn't read their agreement, but he's assuming that basically either they get 51 to 80% of future royalties once their advance is recouped. And so he just talks about the benefits of that. And it's like 2023, it's not 1993. So people trying to compare royalties in the same manner, it doesn't make sense. And I agree with that. It's like people don't listen to the radio as much. Radio still sells. Radio still wins. So I'm not saying that. But aside from radio, there's not much similarity between now and when album sales, when people are saying first week album sales, you're expected to do 1 million or you're expected to do X, Y, and Z. Most people aren't doing those type of numbers and still can have a ton of significance in their career, especially for acts like this. The fact that they own 100% of it is just continuing to show the trend of major artists saying, hey, I want to own what I'm bringing into the world now, versus saying, I'd rather have a massive hit and only own a portion of that. So I think it's fascinating. I think it's really cool how we're seeing independent distributors really become the superheroes of the music industry right now. So
also, just to put it into perspective, a lot of people, because I've heard this all the time, nowadays it's easier for an album to go gold or platinum because of the streaming system. And to an extent, I kind of do agree with that. But what people end up doing is conflating streams with sales. And that's not the case. So people are like, man, you mean to tell me if I just get 1 million streams on platinum? No, I'm not telling you that at all, but that's what people think. And so if we translate these first week sales predictions, 35,000 into what the actual streams would be, that would be over 52 million. It's 52 million and a half streams for this Meek Mill and Rick Ross album. So yeah, when we hear 35,000, we're like, oh man, only 35,000 people. No. That's over 52 million people listening.
I mean, I think it's great. Independence is great, but I ultimately think that these guys were kind of not forced, but they probably are looking at the deals they've gotten before and know that the deals in terms of the amount of money, like the advance being offered to them, wasn't as big as it used to be when they were in their prime, right? So I think when they saw that, they're like, okay, well, what do we do? So it's kind of not forced into independence, but again, because I think a lot of major label acts eventually, they're on their decline, right? These guys are still relevant, but they're definitely not at the height of their careers, like when they've dropped their first couple of albums. So I think that's one of the things, probably the primary thing that kind of forced them into having some other conversations. In this conversation around being independent as part of the promotion of their album. So it allows them to have some of these conversations. So, I mean, I think it's cool, but I think at the end of the day, like all major label acts come back to independence at some point, unless you're one of the rare folks that just kind of stay on the top of the game for decades, right? Like your Drake's, I doubt Jay-Z would ever, well, maybe he might even release an album independently. So it's really just kind of the life cycle of the artist. You start out independent. If you have the opportunity to go major, some artists go major, and then eventually you come back home to independence. So that's I don't really know what else to explore. I mean, I haven't checked out the music yet. I like Ross probably more than I like Meek in terms of the music. So I'm gonna check it out eventually during one of these workouts, one of these days, I guess.
I mean, a lot of artists are doing this, and I think a major benefit to this is the fact that an artist. So, say I'm an artist and I'm kind of like at the Rick Ross level. I want to put an album out with Meek Mill, right? I because I want to make music. It's not even about making money at this point, in the sense that I need to have a hit single. I need to do all of the things that a major label would require me to do in order for this album to even be viable enough for them to get behind it. Well, now I can just, I'm already rich. I'm Rick Ross. I can still get the music out with some degree of marketing and with a decent rollout and get a little money so everyone's paid. But I can do it without the major label, without all the red tape, without waiting for them to approve it, without waiting for the chain of command to say yes, without, because they're dropping now in fourth quarter, which is tough to do anyway on a major. So a lot of artists, I think, probably, if they can do it, if they're at that level and they feel like, if they go the major label route, their music might not come out. This is a much easier way to still get music out to the fans than it would be to go the traditional route.
Yeah, but on the flip side, like it definitely doesn't feel, I mean, and this has to do with just kind of the landscape of music overall, but like it doesn't feel as big as it would have felt, even 4 years ago.
Yeah.
A Meek and Ross album. I'm sure a lot of people don't even know that this thing came out.
Yeah, but then again, you got to figure, who is this for? And then also, I think what it does is it calls into question the market and the sincerity of the fans and the value of the music compared to the value of the rollout. So I'm not one of those people that's going to say, well, if you have this big rollout and a big budget, your music's trash. All I'm saying is your music can be great and not have the same reach because the rollout isn't as concerted as it would be if you were releasing it through UMG or, because the hype isn't as big because you're not doing the same type of media run that a major label would offer. And that colors public perception where they look at it and they're like, oh, this is disappointing. When really it should be exciting. If you're a fan of Meek or Rick Ross, or you just like rap music, period, here's this project. If it's good, share it. But you can listen to it for free. So why then does the conversation often become, they're sales are low, they're this and that, and it's just like the whole, what was it recently? I don't know, just it's Grammy season too, so people are reacting to the Grammys. I think it was which rapper recently said hip hop is dead because the Grammys didn't nominate. Do you know who I'm talking about? This was a news story. It happens every year, though.
I don't know who's saying that the album didn't do well, to be honest, because I feel like the demographic who would say that is also the demographic who's not going to go play the record. Maybe that answers my question. It's the people who wouldn't go play it anyways, because I won't say that I'm a Rick or Meek fan. They're just pop culture major. Occasionally, there's a Rick Ross song that I'm like, oh, damn, this is super fire. I love his flavor of rap snacks. So, like, I'm a casual, like, Rick Ross fan. But also, he lives right down the street from my parents. So, like, I'm tapped into all the events that he does, whatever, because he does a lot on the property because he lives in Evander's old house. But I saw this rollout, like, they were on ESPN all the time. You know, they had the sync on Inside the NBA, and then they were chopping up footage, and that was being seeded out everywhere. They were doing like hilarious memes with like Shaq and Ross, and like I was seeing it everywhere. I don't watch basketball. When I'm in the hotel rooms, I tune into ESPN occasionally because I kind of want to see what the X Games are doing or like different things like that. But I was seeing it. Then I was seeing clips of Meek doing interviews on like The Breakfast Club, whatever. So I think even independently, if I wouldn't have ever read this thread, I would have thought it was a major label release. I don't know what majors are doing right now that's so unique. Whenever I see a major label rollout that goes well, it's because the artist and their team is super creative, not necessarily because UMG has a ton of money. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, Drake's rollout for, I still remember how bad it was, for CLB had like no thought or intention, in my opinion. It's one of the worst rollouts I've ever seen. And it was like, so I'm kind of the thought process that it's not necessarily the money, but comparatively, I thought that they did, like literally until I read Z's thread, I thought it was a major label rollout. So I think that
so did I.
People just aren't listening. They're not consuming music the same way. So the fact that they said, I do agree the cycle of independence, but I kind of think that this was more intentional than forced. You know, it's almost like, we have all these relationships. Why would we give up any equity at this point to a major label system when Rick Ross is, to me, I'm more of a fan of his genius when it comes to the business game, like the way that he turned his house into like there's so like he has buffaloes on his property because he learned how much of a write-off it could be if he had cattle, right? So like, and like hearing him talk through that, and then even the way that he had a movie team rent out his house for a film, but he figured out all of these other things to avoid paying taxes and to make more money. So he was charging them this exorbitant amount of money for like storage, parking, and the use of his house. And they paid it, So I would like to believe that this is more of a smart money move than it is a force of the music, because to me, it was done really, really well. I haven't listened to the album yet, but I definitely planned on listening to it because even with I don't want to highlight the artist who's talking bad about it, but there's been even a lot of like negative things coming at the lyrical content of the project. So I'm like, I think they've done a great job.
I mean, that's great feedback because I didn't really see, I saw interviews and I watch a lot of hoop, but I don't necessarily watch SportsCenter anymore. When I watch SportsCenter, it's typically the clips on YouTube. So I wouldn't see any promo from it unless I guess you're watching the full show. I think it's dope. What I do know from my experience is I know that a lot of times former major label artists have these conversations with independent platforms and have like ridiculous demands because it's so much different than how they were treated in the major label system. So I guess what I want people to pull from this conversation is no matter which trajectory you go, like if you have a tight communication with your fan, a tight relationship with your fans, and you're in tune with what your team is doing, and you kind of know how things work. Even if you go the major label route, once you get out of that system, it's going to be a much softer landing if you kind of understand things like Russ, for example. Like Russ had a plan before going into the major label system, knowing what he needed to extract from that situation, the relationships, learning how the game works, and now coming out of it, it may not be promoted like it may not have. I mean, he puts a lot of money into his promotion, so he might even have a similar budget to what he was using at Columbia. I think he was at Columbia. But I think that's the messaging. Just kind of prepare for the life cycle of your career, and knowing that if you're super in tune with what your community, knowing how things operate, so that it could be a softer landing. Because I know a lot of these artists have a much harder fall at the end of their major label relationship because they didn't really know what was going on. They didn't really build community. They weren't really in tune with their community. They don't have any phone numbers. They don't have any text message. They don't have any email addresses. And it's just a much harder landing for them. And sometimes they just disappear.
Yeah. And I mean, Rick Ross and Meek Mill, again, are not exactly fully independent in the sense that they're never going back to a major. Their next couple solo releases, I imagine they will still be released through majors. So it is different.
According to Joe Budden, nobody's independent. So
well, we can talk about that. So before we get into that, what I was referencing earlier was Lil Yachty saying hip hop is in a terrible place right now because he did not get a Grammy, or at least that's how Complex is contextualizing his statement. So that's what I mean, though. A lot of people, if you're a fan of music that you think is great, or if you're a fan of artists who you think make great music, support those artists, especially nowadays, in the same way that rappers were complaining and we're like, stop, you're just being a bitch. Complaining about, oh, now we got to make TikTok videos. Now we got to make 15-second videos to promote our music. It's so hard. And people are like, that's not hard. It's so easy nowadays to support music you like because it's free. All you have to do is share it and say something positive about it and spread it. And instead of turning the conversation into, oh man, they only did 35,000. Like if you like the music, talk about it. Talk about the music being good. A lot of these, what I don't understand, and I think Dame brought this up, a lot of the metrics that we're using to measure hip hop's health existed before hip hop and never respected the culture to begin with, like the Grammys or album sales. Hip hop's always been a marginalized culture in America and worldwide, really always been marginalized. So now we're using these institutions that marginalized it to determine how well it's doing overall. So when Lil Yachty says hip hop's in a terrible place, I'm like, man, I'm not even.
Yeah, I don't even feel like we should respond to stuff like that. Like,
I agree.
Yachty said it. I mean, some people will come out and say, "Well, you put it in a terrible," like
which I wouldn't agree with either.
I wouldn't, but I mean, I feel like people are just saying these things just to get attention. Like hip hop is dead. That is, it's all comes in cycles. Like, whether hip hop's dead, hip hop's down 40%, like. Hip hop's not going anywhere. If you make hip hop, just make the best music you can make, and that's all I got for you. Like, I
think I can understand his frustration a little bit more than most people who make egregious statements like this, because Yachty is really moving culture and has been for over a decade. Like I just was at Camp Flognaw out here, and aside from SZA, he had the biggest crowd. He got people moving like I haven't seen. I'm talking about way back. Like he had me moving. I was really into his set. And I'm somebody, same thing. I would say I'm a casual Yachty listener, but a big fan of his brand, the way that he connects with fans. I've been watching him vlog for years. He's a YouTuber just as much as he is a rapper. But even now with Concrete Boys, his record label, he's really signing artists who are the future of music. I'm hoping he can figure out, because I've never seen it really work, artists signing artists aside from like Young Money, maybe. Not even maybe, Young Money did it. But I don't know. I think Yachty is moving culture in a way that most people who are hip hoppers have never even imagined. So I do understand his frustration. I'm not validating this statement because hip hop can't be dead because he is carrying the torch. So it's like, it's almost weird that he's saying it because it's like, because of what he's doing, hip hop is not in a bad place, in my opinion. He's like a big reason that there's so many creative, unique weirdos. Like he's transcending genres right now, but still making turn up tracks. So I get his frustration. It sounds like a typical frustrated artist. They make these grandiose statements because they're upset. But with him, I kind of get why he's upset. But I also think the Academy, like Payne is saying, is like, it's not an academy of your peers. It's perception. You would think that it's a lot of young people voting on these things, and it's not. Do you know what I'm saying? And it's not a lot of people who are predominantly listening to hip hop who are voting on these things either. So I think the consideration for like who your audience is versus I don't want to invalidate the Academy. I just got nominated, so I'm not going to invalidate it. But I also have never mentally put such stock in institutions outside of what we're creating on the inside, because the people who are really moving culture are the ones who aren't worried about what the institutions are championing, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, that's my point. Every time someone has a criticism of an institution that exists both outside of and in spite of hip hop culture, instead of criticizing the institution, they criticize hip hop culture. It's like, that doesn't make, it's like, if I have my family in the house and someone in California, the Kardashians do some dumb shit, I'm like, man, my family sucks. Like, it has nothing to do with me. So why are we using these traditionally anti-hip hop institutions to validate what we're doing? That's all I'm saying. If Yachty had just been like, damn, the Grammys aren't really rewarding creativity, I'd be like, okay, yeah, you're right. You did a creative album. You're up there with reach. You should have gotten considered and nominated, probably. I don't know. I mean, who cares? It's the Grammys. I want to win a Grammy, but at the same time,
he called it a funk album. I think that's part of the issue. He was calling it a funk album. So then it's like, that's like the Tyler thing. Tyler was frustrated that he was nominated, some years back. He was like, I'm making pop music, but y'all wanted to put me in the hip hop category. So like, to me, the way that Tyler went about his critique, I respect. But yeah, I think that even Yachty has to consider that, like, he put himself in a unique category too. So it's like, what do you do with that?
I think a lot of these comments and a lot of these frustrations is really the result of just the market being more fragmented, right? And less stars rising to the top, because there's a lot of different things happening. Like, you're saying Yachty shifting the culture. I'm definitely not going to disagree with that. But what I'm going to say is, like, a lot of people don't know, right? And there's a lot of people doing things and have their own community, and they might be big communities, but like, it's so fragmented, it's going to be hard to get the Grammys' attention for some of these pockets that may be bubbling, right? It's going to get even harder to recognize it because it's going to become even more fragmented into the future, in my opinion. So, I mean, I never even thought about like anything other than the fans and putting out music. Like, I never thought about, having a gold records or platinum records or Grammy. Sure, if that's what the artist wanted, we'd figure out the path to try to get to that? How do we align ourselves? Who do we need to talk to? When do we need to submit? Are there submission deadlines? Things like that. Like, what is the procedure to actually even be considered? But, you know, for me, it's always just been about, you know, how do we stack fans? How do we engage fans? And, you know, let the chips fall where they may.
Yeah, and the thing with that is, like, people really look at that as an inferior position, and I don't understand why, because at the same time, just the fan culture is fan culture. It's consumer culture. People don't know what they're talking about, but they have a lot to say. And so you have the fan culture who will constantly and consistently contradict themselves. They'll say, why is the music devalued? And then when first week sales come out, instead of focusing on the music, they're talking about the sales numbers. And, oh, this is terrible for this artist. How embarrassing. If it were about the music, you'd be talking about the music and not the numbers. Or they'll say, you know, like what Dame said, you know, they'll talk about these institutions, and then instead of celebrating, they'll do both. They'll celebrate, you know, major labels and talk about which artist is better because who didn't sell out and who sold the most and who has a better rollout, who has better marketing. And then they'll also praise like a Strange Music or a Funk Volume and say, well, look how successful they were. They made it about the fans. But at the same time, they're not acknowledging their own hypocrisy and their own stupidity in making those statements, because both Strange Music and Funk Volume and independent labels like them generated millions of dollars and stayed true to the fans. So it's a stupid conversation. And when you jump into the cesspool of ignorance, it's ultimately just people on the internet trying to get clicks, trying to get attention, because, and this is my hot take, used to be that there were trusted music critics who just kind of became experts and rose to the ranks. And now it's just people on Twitter. So here we are.
That's the whole message.
Yeah. So where do we want to go from here?